softly glowing lamp cast a muted circle of light over the cluttered table, strewn with photographs varying in size and age. Detective Lucien Moreau leaned over the array, his keen gray eyes narrowing as he traced the faintest patterns hidden within the images. Across from him, Lise Dumas adjusted the angle of a picture under the warm glow, her fingers deftly pointing out nuances that escaped the casual observer. "Look here," Lise murmured, voice low but steady. "The shadows behind the figures, they don't align with the light source. It's as if the reflections are deliberately misplaced." Lucien nodded slowly. "Indeed. It's as though someone is playing with the very fabric of light itself, weaving shadows and reflections to tell a story beneath the surface." The room was thick with silence, punctuated only by the soft crackling of the fireplace and the distant murmur of Paris streets beyond the studio walls. Lucien reached for a cigarette, the familiar gesture grounding him amid the spiraling complexity of this case. He lit it, the tiny flame flickering before settling into a steady glow. As the smoke curled upward, his mind raced through the images once more. A sudden insight struck him, a recurring motif that had eluded him until now. "Lise, see this." In almost every photograph, there's a subtle reflection, a faint double image, often in a corner or along the edges. It's not accidental. The killer is embedding something here, a signature perhaps. Lise leaned closer, eyes scanning the photographs. She pulled out her notebook, scribbling rapidly. This is more than mere trickery. It's psychological warfare, designed to unsettle and confuse. The killer uses these shadows and reflections to distort reality, to hide in plain sight. The detective's gaze shifted to the studio's large mirror, its surface catching the flickering candlelight. If we can recreate these conditions, perhaps we can decode the message. Together, they began to arrange lights and mirrors around the studio, replicating the setups likely used to produce the eerie photographs. Lucien adjusted an old lamp, casting long angular shadows across the wooden floorboards. Lise positioned a mirror at a deliberate angle, the reflected light bending and fracturing the space. Suddenly, the studio seemed transformed, a place where light and shadow danced in a delicate balance, blurring the lines between what was real and what was illusion. Lucien's heart quickened as he recognized the chilling effect the killer intended. "The photographs are a stage," Lise whispered, "and the studio is the theater where this twisted play unfolds." Lucien's mind flickered back to the victims, their ghostly images forever captured in frames they never consented to. Each picture was a fragment of a larger design, a puzzle of light and deception waiting to be solved. As the hours passed, the detective and photographer worked side by side, their shared purpose forging a fragile bond of trust. The weight of the case pressed upon them, but so did a growing sense of hope that understanding the killer's methods would lead them to the truth. Outside, rain began to fall, the soft patter against the windows a steady rhythm to their efforts. Lucien glanced at Lise, seeing not just an ally but a kindred spirit haunted by loss and driven by the need for justice. "We read close," he said quietly. "The shadows are finally giving up their secrets." Lise nodded, eyes reflecting the flickering light. "And soon, the darkness that hides the truth will be forced into the light." But even as they uncovered the patterns, the detective knew the path ahead would be fraught with danger. The killer's game was far from over, and the shadows on Rue Saint-Lazare were deep and cunning. Lucien's resolve hardened. This dance of light and shadow was a battle for reality itself, and he would not rest until the final act was revealed. The studio fell into silence once more, the photographs resting quietly under the soft glow. Yet the echoes of the captured shadows lingered, whispering of secrets yet to be unveiled, and a killer still lurking in the murky interplay of light and deception. The soft glow of the studio's solitary lamp cast long shadows across the cluttered room, illuminating stacks of photographs and scattered negatives. Lucien Moreau sat hunched over a small table, his keen grey eyes fixed intently on a faded black and white print. The photo was one he had examined before, Yet now, under a different angle of light, a subtle detail caught his attention. Liz, Lucien called softly, not wanting to disturb the fragile quiet that hung between them like a veil. "Come here, look at this." Liz Dumas approached cautiously, her dark hair neatly pinned back, her sharp features drawn with curiosity and unease. She leaned over the table, her eyes narrowing as she took in the image. "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Lucien pointed delicately at a shadowed corner of the photograph. "See this figure here, in the background, near the edge. Until now, we've overlooked it, perhaps dismissed it as a flaw or a reflection. But look closely. This is no accident." The figure was indistinct, shrouded in darkness and blurred by time, but there was no mistaking the human shape, a pale face, turned slightly away. A haunting presence that seemed to watch silently from beyond the frame. "Who is that?" Liz's breath hitched as a chill passed between them. Lucien shook his head slowly. "That's what we need to find out, this victim. No one has identified them yet, but their presence here changes everything." The room seemed to close in around them, the air thickening with unspoken questions. Lucien's mind raced, piecing together fragments of past conversations and half-remembered details. The photograph was more than a mere image. It was a silent witness, holding secrets that the killer had tried desperately to conceal. Liz's fingers trembled as she reached for a small notebook on the corner of the table, flipping through pages filled with meticulous observations and sketches of lighting angles. "I never noticed this figure before," she admitted, her voice tight with guilt. "But now that you mention it, I recall an old negative that was damaged, faded, almost erased. I thought it was just an accident of time." Lucien nodded. "Sometimes light can reveal what darkness tries to hide." The detective's thoughts turned inward, recalling the stories Liz had shared about her family, the artistic legacy, the shadows of grief that lingered beneath her calm exterior. The mention of her siblings' mysterious disappearance echoed ominously now, as if the photograph had been silently waiting to link their fates. "Liz," Lucien said gently, "you mentioned your sibling before. Is there more you can tell me? Anything that might connect to what we're seeing here?" She hesitated, eyes dropping to the floor. It was years ago, she began, voice fragile. "My brother, he vanished without a trace. The police closed the case quickly, calling it a runaway, but I never believed it. There were strange things I couldn't explain. And now, seeing this photo, I wonder if it's all connected." The room was silent except for the ticking of a clock and the distant murmur of the Paris streets beyond the studio walls. Lucien reached out, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Well, find the truth, Liz, together." Their resolve was interrupted by a soft knock on the door. Madeleine Rousseau entered hesitantly, her eyes red-rimmed and glossy, clutching a worn handkerchief. Her frail frame seemed almost swallowed by the large coat she wore. "Detective Moreau," she said, voice trembling, "I heard you were looking into the photographs. I have something that might help." Lucien gestured for her to sit, offering a quiet space as she gathered her courage. "Please, tell us what you know." Madeleine swallowed hard, memories flooding back in waves. "The victim in the photo, that's my cousin. We never found his body. The police said he disappeared, but I always feared the worst." Her hands shook as she produced a small, folded letter, yellowed with age. "He wrote this before he vanished. It mentioned strange people near the station, shadows that followed him. I kept it hidden, afraid no one would believe me." Lucien took the letter carefully, his heart pounding with the weight of new evidence. The investigation was no longer just a puzzle of images, it was a tapestry woven with pain, loss, and dark secrets. As rain began to patter softly against the studio window, Lucien stood and gazed out at the grey Parisian skyline. The shadows lengthened, mirroring the deepening mystery that now engulfed them all. Somewhere in the labyrinth of streets and alleys, the truth waited to be uncovered, hidden behind layers of light and deception. He turned back to the others, determination hardening in his eyes. "We are closer than ever." But we must tread carefully. This case is far from over. The room fell into a thoughtful silence, the weight of the unseen victim settling over them. A reminder that in the interplay of light and shadow, some truths remain elusive until they are brought into the harsh glare of revelation. And as Lucien prepared to delve deeper into the tangled web, he knew one thing with certainty. The faces in the photographs were no longer just images, they were the voices of the forgotten, demanding justice in a city where shadows whispered secrets only the brave dared to hear. The room was heavy with a silence that felt almost oppressive, the kind that presses in on a man's chest and makes each breath a labor. Lucien Moreau sat across from Lise Dumas, the only light coming from the single bulb overhead that cast stark shadows against the peeling wallpaper of the photographer's studio. The faint scent of cigarette smoke mingled with the musk of old photographs and the metallic tang of developing chemicals lingering in the air. Lizzie's fingers trembled slightly as she turned a page in her small, battered notebook, the rustle breaking the quiet. Lucien watched her closely, noting the tension in her posture, the way her eyes darted to the window where the last rays of dusk faded into the Parisian night. "Tell me everything you remember," he urged gently, his voice steady but imbued with urgency. She hesitated, biting her lower lip, then exhaled slowly. "It's not just the photos," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "There are things I never wanted to admit, not even to myself." The detective leaned forward, his gray eyes sharp and patient. "Whatever it is, Lise, it's crucial for this investigation. The victims, the photographs. They were all connected." For a long moment, she said nothing, her gaze fixed on a faded portrait hanging crookedly on the wall. The image depicted a young man with a wistful expression, her brother. She had finally admitted, though the words felt like a confession. "He died years ago," she continued, her voice breaking. "Circumstances I've never fully understood. But now, with these photographs, I fear the past is reaching out to us. To me." Lucien's mind raced. This new detail intertwined with the already tangled threads of the case, adding a personal layer that was both delicate and dangerous. "Do you believe someone is using your brother's death as a tool?" She nodded slowly, eyes glistening. "I do. And I think that person is closer than I ever imagined." The detective's thoughts drifted briefly to the streets outside, where the city's usual hum was subdued, as if holding its breath alongside them. "We were not alone in this," he said softly. "There are others who know more than they admit." Days later, Lucien found himself once again in the warm, bustling atmosphere of Henry Lefebvre's cafe. The clinking of cups and the murmur of conversations formed a familiar backdrop as he sat across from Madeleine Rousseau. Her face was drawn and pale, lines of grief etched deeply, yet her eyes held a steely resolve that unsettled him. "Madame Rousseau," Lucien began carefully, "there's something you're not telling us. The connection between your family and the Dumas siblings, it's more than coincidence, isn't it?" She swallowed hard, fingers twisting the edge of her shawl. "Yes," she confessed, voice trembling but resolute. "I've kept silent for too long. The past, it's full of shadows, secrets that tore families apart." The cafe seemed to grow quieter, the patrons now mere silhouettes behind them. "Your sister, Liza's sibling, what happened?" Madeleine's eyes flickered with pain. "Betrayal, a love turned sore," Lise whispered in the dark. "It's why the photographs haunt us. They were not just images. They were echoes of a broken trust." Lucien felt the weight of her words settle heavily. This revelation shifted the ground beneath the investigation. It was no longer just about the murders or the manipulated photographs. It was about the fragile, painful ties that bound these families and the betrayals that festered beneath polite smiles and quiet streets. Back at the studio, the atmosphere was charged. Lise sat by the window, the fading light casting long shadows that danced across her face. Her usual composure was fractured, vulnerability seeping through. "I never wanted to drag you into this," she admitted to Lucien. "But now I see there's no turning back. The truth, it's buried beneath years of lies." Lucien offered a reassuring nod, lighting a cigarette as he contemplated the labyrinthine path ahead. "We'll find it. Together." Outside, the night deepened, shadows lengthening and merging until the street lamps flickered like distant stars. The city whispered its secrets, but for Lucien Moreau, the true mystery lay beneath the surface, hidden in the fractured reflections of trust and betrayal, waiting to be uncovered. As the chapter closed, the detective's resolve hardened. The faces in the photographs were no longer just victims caught in impossible frames. They were reminders of the fragile line between truth and deception, a line Lucien was determined to cross, no matter the cost. The studio was cloaked in a muted haze, the faint scent of chemicals lingering in the air like a ghost of days long past. Lucien Moreau stood before the cluttered workspace. His eyes narrowed as he surveyed the array of photographic prints pinned unevenly to the faded wallpaper. Each image bore the marks of time and secrecy, shadows curling at the edges like whispered confessions. Tonight, the studio was both a sanctuary and a battleground, the place where the elusive truth might finally be caught in the fragile web of light and shadow. Lucien reached carefully for a small, tilted mirror resting against the edge of a worn wooden table. His fingers trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from the weight of anticipation. Adjusting the angle, he caught a sliver of light from the overhead bulb, sending it cascading across the photographs in fractured beams. The reflected light danced like a living thing, revealing subtle contours and hidden distortions that had eluded him before. Les Dumas sat quietly in the corner, her dark eyes fixed on Lucien's every movement. The soft rustle of her fingers tracing the edges of a small leather-bound notebook was the only sound breaking the stillness. Her usually reserved expression bore the faintest hint of vulnerability tonight, a crack in the carefully constructed façade she wore like armor. Lucien noticed the way her gaze lingered on the photographs, the flicker of old pain behind those sharp features. "This light," Lucien began, his voice low and steady, "it can reveal more than just images. It can betray lies, expose truths hidden in plain sight. But it can also deceive. The angle, the reflection, they can bend reality." Lise nodded slowly, her lips pressed into a thin line. "I've spent years perfecting the play of light in my work," she admitted. "But this feels different. Like the shadows themselves are part of the story." Lucien reached for an old camera resting among the clutter, its metal cool beneath his fingertips. With practiced ease, he loaded a fresh roll of film, mindful of the delicate balance between shadow and illumination. As he raised the camera, the overhead bulb flickered a brief plunge into darkness that sent a shiver down his spine. In the sudden quiet, the faint click of the shutter seemed to echo louder, a heartbeat in the stillness. He lowered the camera and studied the scene anew. The interplay of light and shadow in the studio was no accident. It was a carefully orchestrated performance. The photographs on the walls, once static, now seemed alive with hidden movement, their surfaces warped by subtle reflections that twisted the images into something uncanny. "Look here," Lucien said, pointing to a particular print where a faint, ghostly shape shimmered just beyond the main subject's frame. "See how the reflection bends? It's almost as if another presence is caught within the glass, an echo or a shadow." Lise's breath caught. That wasn't there before," she whispered. Lucien's gaze met hers, the intensity of his gray eyes belying the storm of thoughts beneath. "The killer uses these distortions to mask reality, to hide in plain sight. We're chasing shadows, lies, and sometimes the shadows reflect more than we want to see." For a moment, the weight of the room pressed down on them, both the silent testimony of the images, the unspoken pain tethering their pasts to the present moment. Liz's defenses faltered, and she glanced away, her voice barely audible. "I've been afraid to face what those photographs might reveal. Not just about the victims, but about my own family." Lucien stepped closer, the detective's usual reserve softened by empathy. "We don't have to face it alone. The past can be a prison, but it can also be a key." Together, they returned to the task at hand. Lucien adjusted the lighting setup once more, experimenting with angles and reflections, trying to replicate the killer's elusive technique. Hours slipped by as they worked in tandem, Liza's expertise guiding the technical precision, Lucien's analytical mind piecing together the psychological puzzle. The room seemed to breathe with their efforts, shadows lengthening and retreating as if alive. The photographs revealed new secrets under the shifting light, distorted faces, doubled images, faint imprints that suggested a presence just beyond the visible. Finally, Lucien held up a newly developed print, his breath catching. The image bore a subtle but unmistakable distortion, a ghostly, warped reflection trapped within the frame, a fractured echo of a figure that should not have been there. The boundary between reality and illusion blurred, and with it, the certainty of truth. This, Lucien said quietly, is what we've been chasing. The fracture point where deception becomes reality. Liza looked up, her eyes glistening with unspoken emotion. And what happens when the reflection reveals more about ourselves than the crime? Lucien met her gaze, the flicker of shared understanding passing between them. Then we must decide what to believe and what we're willing to face. The studio fell silent once more, the fragile light casting fractured reflections across their faces. Outside, the restless city of Paris carried on, oblivious to the quiet revelations unfolding in a modest room near Rue Saint-Lazare. Within that space, the boundary between memory and manipulation, truth and deception, was drawn ever thinner, waiting, inevitably, to be crossed. As the night deepened, Lucien lit a cigarette, the soft glow briefly illuminating his weathered features. He exhaled slowly, the smoke curling like the shadows that clung to the corners of the room. The investigation was far from over, and the photographs still held their secrets, but for the first time, the fractured reflections offered a path forward. Tomorrow, Lucien murmured, we chase the shadows again. Liz nodded, the tentative trust between them now a fragile but vital bond. Together, they would face the darkness, one fractured reflection at a time. The air in the dimly lit cafe was thick with the scent of tobacco and strong coffee, the murmur of late-night patrons blending into a low hum of ambient noise. Lucien Moreau sat alone at a corner table, a half-smoked cigarette balanced between his fingers as his gaze flicked between a series of photographs spread before him. Each image was a frozen moment in time, yet among them, one figure stood out with unnerving clarity, a tall, gaunt man with piercing cold blue eyes that seemed to pierce right through the shadows of the frame. Lucien's mind raced as he traced the contours of the man's face, the pale light catching the sharp angles and casting deep shadows that seemed to cling to him like a second skin. There was something profoundly unsettling about him, a presence that whispered of sorrow and menace entwined. The detective's instincts tightened like a news. The man in the photographs was no mere bystander. He was the key to the mystery that had haunted Rue Saint-Lazare. He exhaled slowly, the smoke curling upward in spirals as memories of the case swirled in his mind, the inexplicable appearances of victims in photographs they never posed for. The subtle manipulations of light and shadow, the fragile boundary between truth and illusion. And now, finally, a face emerged from the darkness, a shadow crossing into the light. Meanwhile, in a sparse apartment not far from the train station, Julian Marchand sat motionless in the shadowed corner, his gaunt frame silhouetted against the pale moonlight filtering through the cracked window. His cold blue eyes reflected a tumult of memories and pain, a bitter history etched deep within his soul. Once a promising artist, betrayed and shattered by those he trusted, Marchand had spiraled into a world where justice was twisted by his own hands. He reached out and touched the worn photograph on the table before him, a reminder of the past that had become his torment and his weapon. His fingers trembled slightly, not from weakness but from the weight of his resolve. Every manipulated image, every shadow cast, was part of a carefully orchestrated symphony of revenge, a message to those who had wronged him, and a warning to anyone who dared to uncover the truth. Back at the photography studio, Lies Dumas moved quietly, adjusting the lighting with practiced care. The soft click of the switches echoed in the silent room, shadows lengthening and retreating with each subtle change. She paused, her eyes lingering on a recent photograph, the image stirring memories she had long kept locked away. The resemblance to Marchand was unmistakable, a ghost from her own past rising to the surface. Her hands trembled slightly as she jotted notes into her small notebook, the lines between ally and adversary blurring with every revelation. She and Lucien shared a fragile trust, but beneath it lay a tension born of fear and unspoken truths. Her connection to the victims, particularly her lost sibling, tethered her to the unfolding nightmare, and the presence of Marchand threatened to pull her under. Late that evening, the narrow alley near Rue Saint-Lazare was bathed in the flickering glow of gas lamps, their light casting long, dancing shadows on the cobblestones. Lucien stood firm, confronting the figure emerging from the darkness, Julian Marchand himself. The chill in the air was matched only by the icy glare that passed between them. Words were exchanged like daggers, each syllable heavy with accusation, denial, and the weight of past wounds. Marchand's voice was calm yet laced with venom, his twisted sense of justice laid bare. Lucien held his ground, the detective's resolve steeled by the knowledge that this man was both victim and villain, a living embodiment of the shadows that clouded the truth. As the confrontation deepened, the interplay of light and shadow seemed to pulse around them, the very fabric of reality bending under the strain of deception. Lucien understood that exposing Marchand was only the beginning. The true battle lay in unraveling the layers of pain and illusion that had shaped this tragic figure. The chapter closed on a tense note, the unresolved echoes of the encounter lingering in the cold night air. The shadows on Rue Saint-Lazare had crossed paths with a man driven by vengeance, and the detective's pursuit of justice had entered its most perilous phase yet. The question remained, could Lucien outmaneuver the darkness before it consumed them all? Or would the lines between hunter and hunted blur into a final, devastating deception? The narrative pulse quickened, drawing readers deeper into a web of shadow and light, where every reflection held a secret and every truth was veiled beneath layers of intricate lies. The stage was set for the inevitable clash, a crossing of shadows where the past's ghosts threatened to rewrite the future.